Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Mac Observer podcast show thing. I don't know. We'll settle on a name at some point. I am your host. I've settled on Ken Ray, joined today by Scott Mantz. He is an entertainment reporter. He is a panel host. He knows a thing or two about a thing or two when it comes to entertainment. He talks to people about entertainment, so we figured why not talk to him. Scott, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Ken. Looking forward to this conversation. For everyone listening and watching, I've been an entertainment journalist now for almost 25 years, and I've been reviewing movies for 25 years. I've been as a producer for Access Hollywood for almost 18 years. I'm currently, if you live in Southern California, you can catch me covering entertainment news on KTLA TV in Los Angeles. I've definitely an in-demand moderator of panel conversations for TV and film, especially during Emmy and Oscar season. So if you're out and about at the movies in Southern California and there's a Q&A, I'm probably the one moderating it.
I was going to ask you to do that, so thanks. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So let's start with, I don't know exactly where to start on this because we're obviously going to be working towards Apple stuff, but you can't talk about Apple and streaming without talking about streaming in general. I guess the very first thing I'm wondering is, can there be any such thing as a breakout show at this point? My immediate thought is, well, Ted Lasso was, but then I remember, well, we were all inside for Ted Lasso. And now we're going out. There are more streaming options out there. I will mention a show to a friend of mine who we have been aligned on TV forever. The other day I said, man, well, when you watch Hacks, and she said, what's Hacks? And I'm like, it's the show that everybody's watching. And then I realized, well, no, not anymore. Is it possible for there to be a breakout movie or a breakout series that just comes from streaming?
Well, you answered the question right at the top of the question, Ken, because Ted Lasso was a fluke. It broke out into the streaming world while everyone was stuck inside. And on top of that, it was a show that was very, very positive and uplifting, which was exactly what we needed during those first 6 to 8 months of the pandemic when, there was no hope and everything was crazy and everybody was stuck inside. And it seemed like vaccines, if you were going to go that route, were a long ways off. Also at that point, so, Ted Lasso broke through in the streaming world for TV, but then you also had a movie called Coda, which was an Apple film that became the very first streaming movie to win the Academy Award for Best Picture, and it went to Apple over Netflix. So that is definitely worth pointing out. But to really answer the question, I think now that people are as close to normal in their lives as they've been in 5 years, they're back at it. They're out and about again. Most people are not still, holding up at home. And you just have so much content. You have so much content. It's my job to cover this stuff. And even I cannot keep up with everything. There just isn't enough time in the day to watch every single show and every single movie. And that's if you take out sleep. You still can't do it. So to have a breakout show that is exclusively streaming like Ted Lasso, I think the closest we're coming to that really is The Bear. The Bear, it's on FX, but it's on Hulu. And that's where most people are watching it. And where Ted Lasso won the Academy Award, the Emmy Award for Best Comedy Series 2 years in a row. In its third year, it was beat out by The Bear. And The Bear is poised to actually win its second straight Emmy for comedy series because it's that much of a breakout. And, when I talk to colleagues and peers in the industry who cover the Oscars and the Emmys for a living, they'll tell you that when it comes to the Emmys, there's so much content on so many of these streaming services like Apple, Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, Paramount Plus, Peacock, you name it, that a lot of these Academy voters will just keep watching what they've already been watching instead of watching something brand new. So, when you have a show like Slow Horses or Lessons in Chemistry or Baby Reindeer, those are shows that have really broken out, especially Baby Reindeer. That's kind of a breakout, probably the closest to The Bear or Ted Lasso that I think I've seen. But there's just so much content, and I just don't think that we're going to see the likes of a Ted Lasso breakout where everyone is talking about it um, again soon.
I gotta say, I'm one of the people who holds back and watches things that I know are going to be around because there's no telling whether something's going to be around. I was waiting on the Big Door Prize. I don't know why I was waiting on the Big Door Prize. I have to ask people now whether season 2 actually has an ending or whether it just stops, because now it's been canceled, and that's kind of an odd thing as well. As far as what you're saying about there not being enough time, I almost don't watch any of the Apple TV Plus stuff, and that's not because I'm watching stuff on Disney. That's not true. I am actually watching stuff on Disney Plus, but I mean, it's not because I'm watching too much stuff other places. It's because, well, I mean, there's just not much time, and also I'm not sure if that thing's going to break through. Like for the first time, and I cannot remember how long, as you and I are talking, Time Bandits came out today. And I've already watched the first episode because that movie, speaks to me in a huge way. I like Taika Waititi. And then so it's like, well, of course I'm going to watch that. It's like, well, what about the 9 other things they came out with in the past 2 weeks? And it's like, well, I'm kind of busy watching The Acolyte, actually. So I guess then, and maybe this ties into where we were in the pandemic, because around the same time of the pandemic, you had a bunch of streaming services starting up for the first time, and they were just throwing money hand over tea kettle, if you want to mix metaphors, at streaming stuff. We're getting reports that Apple is going to be, tamping back on spending a bit. We'll talk about that in a second. Batgirl very famously didn't happen because it cost less to take it as a write-off than it did to try to promote it. At least that's the
Awful.
story.
Crazy. Yeah.
Are we past peak streaming at this point? Are we past the golden age, I guess would be the question.
We're past the golden age for now. Who knows what the future holds? There could be another boom, but again, with all the streaming services, many of them like, Paramount Plus, Disney Plus, I think dropped during the pandemic, and people were watching The Mandalorian during the pandemic. I mean, that was a breakout show for sure because it was Star Wars. But, the flip side to that is, you're watching The Acolyte. I watch all the Star Trek shows on Paramount Plus because I'm a lifelong Trekkie. And I watch those shows because I love Star Trek. And that's on top of everything else. But I think, that boom, that wild, wild west of streaming where all the services were throwing money hand over fist at showrunners and at producers and writers and actors, the fact that you had Apple of all the streaming services with all the money that they've got because of their laptops and because of the iPhones and the iPads, for Apple to announce that they are scaling back is the biggest nail in the coffin for the spending boom that happened a few years ago, and the biggest indicator that we're just in lean times now, which is an especially big problem for people trying to make a living in this business. Writers, especially after the writers' strikes and the actors' strike, they came out on the other side of that and found the studios and the streamers tightening their belts when it came to spending. So, there are a lot of people who are questioning now if the strikes were even worth it because they came out on the other side. They can't get any work at all. But it just goes to show you that as fast as things kind of, happen, like when things really, really, everybody jumped into the deep end with the spending money left and right, hand over fist. That's as fast as these streaming services went, wait, hang on a second. We gotta scale back. The whole reason that Paramount went up for sale in the first place was because they were not sort of up to speed enough in the streaming world, and Paramount Plus was losing a lot of money. So now that it's sold to someone like Ellison, who can really maybe bring Paramount into the 21st century with all the streaming and all that, but you do have a situation where they're spending a lot more than they're making, but they have deep pockets to begin with. So it was only a matter of time for a place like Apple TV to say like, well, we got to scale back.
Okay,
So
I, I do have to ask you one question though, because you say Apple is announcing that they're scaling back, and it was actually, and maybe we're splitting hairs. It was actually a Bloomberg piece that said secret people said to know something about something, say Apple is scaling back. That same Bloomberg piece said, then again, Apple doesn't really have to make money on streaming because if you like Apple TV, maybe you're going to buy an iPhone, maybe you're going to buy a Mac. I mean, do you see that Bloomberg piece? I guess the two questions I have. First of all, do you see that Bloomberg piece as, yeah, that's definitely a thing that's happening? And the second thing is, well, I guess it's the same question. Is it true? I mean, if they don't need to worry about ratings, and we can talk about those if you want to, if they don't need to worry about ratings, and what they're really worried about is, are we creating a halo for everything else we do? Do they have to? Do they actually have to scale back? And do you take what Bloomberg wrote as read?
well, listen, as far as the Bloomberg story, what I say is in a case like that, where there's smoke, there's fire. And because so many other streaming services have scaled back, uh, I just see that as well. It was only a matter of time before it hit a sort of indestructible company like Apple. So I mean, look, I mean, certainly Apple hasn't confirmed that, and I'm going off the Bloomberg story, and it's not like I read it in Us Weekly. I mean, Bloomberg is, pretty up there in terms of like getting news. So I mean, I see that as like a face value thing that there is a problem for Apple, and that's why they're scaling back. But Ken, this all comes back to the question that in a case of a streaming service like Apple, how much of an expense is the content used as like a production cost to sell phones and iPads and laptops? So if people are buying phones and iPhones and laptops and to consume the content, then it's a business expense. It's a very expensive business expense because a show like For All Mankind and The Morning Show with Reese Witherspoon and Jennifer Aniston, those shows are not cheap. So, but at the same time, I do feel like you had a very expensive show like Masters of the Air, which was a Tom Hanks, Steven Spielberg production following Band of Brothers and the Pacific, and it just didn't get the same level of traction. And I thought going into the Emmy nominations a couple of weeks ago that it was going to like clean up, especially in the technical categories, and I think it only got nominated for 3 Emmys. So and that was an expensive show. So I do think that I guess you'd have to be on the inside to be like, okay, well, how much are we making selling these the hardware, and how much is the content that we're producing related to the selling of the hardware?
Yeah, to be honest, and I know I just said, well, Bloomberg says this. I've always wondered if that actually is what their plan is, because throw a rock at a device and you can get Apple TV Plus on it. It's not exclusive to iPad. It's on whatever tablet, it's on whatever console, it's on whatever computer, it's online. It's available. And so that would seem to indicate that Apple wants, first of all, to get it out there and to make money. I don't think in Masters of the Air they were, on their iPhone as they're flying over whatever country going, I love you, but I gotta fly here. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So you're a Star Trek guy. Let's boil
Yeah.
this down. Star Trek 1, which should actually be called Star Trek the Motion Picture, and we all know that, but just for the sake of brevity, which I've now killed.
Yeah.
Star Trek 1, they spend gobs and gobs and gobs of money like they don't know what they're doing, even though some people did, other, whatever. That's a whole story that people can read about if they want to. Star Trek 2, they're like, right, we want to do this, but we're going to tighten this way the heck up. And they ended up with a more commercially viable movie. I would actually say probably a better movie, may not be the best Star Trek thing, but this is a conversation for you and me over a drink, not for this podcast.
Yeah, sure.
Is this what streaming needs to do? That same Bloomberg piece, I think, said that they were spending $50 million just on the cast for the morning show, which is not to say that Jennifer Aniston isn't worth it and Billy Crudup isn't worth it and Reese Witherspoon isn't worth it, but spending a ton of money on that show that could easily go to 10 other shows with much lower production costs, much lower maybe lower expectation, but that might end up with another breakout. I mean, do they just need to kind of not maybe spend less money, but spend the same amount of money on more stuff?
Well, first of all, just for everyone listening who really wants to know, so Star Trek: The Motion Picture cost almost $40 million to make, and it made about $80 million at the box office. So in that sense, they kind of broke even because of the marketing and everything, and the money that goes to the theaters. So they when they tried again with Star Trek 2, that was produced through the TV unit at Paramount. That's why they were able to bring the budget down from 40 million on Star Trek 1 to 12 million on Star Trek 2, and that movie made about as much as the motion picture. So you've got a much bigger profit margin. But I digress. I had to throw that in there because I'm a Trekker and everything. But here's the thing, Ken. No one's going to go on record, at least as far as I know, and say, yes, this is how much these people are getting made. This is how much this show costs. But you brought up the morning show, just how much the cast is making. I mean, that's an insane number per episode just for the cast. And then you've got the rest of the production. I look at Paramount Plus and I look at shows like Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Those shows cost a ton of money. And you've got Discovery, Strange New Worlds, you've got Section 31 coming and Starfleet Academy. And my question has always been, Ken, is Paramount Plus, a streaming service, making enough money on subscriptions and maybe advertising to cover the production budgets per episode for those shows? And I just think to myself, like, how could it possibly make that kind of money? But you're talking about a streaming service that is a part of CBS, part of Paramount Studios. So there's money from that. So does the income from that show that comes in sort of help CBS and the big studio? Like, I don't know how the money sort of funnels through to maybe like help out the other divisions. But like, the question you're asking me about morning show is a question I have about Star Trek, and I get it again. I love Star Trek, and I feel the same way about Disney Plus with the Star Wars shows. Although I think Star Wars has a much bigger audience than Star Trek. But how are they able to afford that? Is that all coming from streaming? Is that all coming from advertising? It seems like a lot of money. So that's where the belt tightening comes in. And here's another sort of thing with Paramount Plus. So they're moving forward with a Starfleet Academy show, but they canceled Discovery. They canceled Lower Decks, which was an animated show, and Section 31, the show with Michelle Yeoh, Academy Award winner, was supposed to be a series, and now it's just a TV movie, presumably because Michelle Yeoh is very in demand and she wants to do other things, but maybe it is because they want to rein in the costs. At the end of the third season of Star Trek Picard, everybody was hoping that its showrunner, Terry Matalas, was going to move forward with a show called Star Trek Legacy. I mean, that is a show that fans want, and Paramount is not doing that show. Is it because they just don't want to? Is it because they just can't afford it? Is it because of the the sale stuff, that was going back and forth with Skydance and Sony and others, now that that's kind of settled, maybe, who knows? But I just don't see the justification for spending that kind of money on a TV show that where you're not Netflix, where you have 240 million subscribers and all you have is subscriptions and you're fledgling. Like, I just don't know where that money comes from.
It is weird. And again, a lot of it, I have to imagine, comes back to we were all sitting at home and nobody knew when we were going to go back outside. And so, yeah, let's just throw money hand over fist at these services because this may be 5 years. We don't know how long it's going to be. It was probably a mistake to use Star Trek as an example with you, though, because you and I are having a Star Trek conversation, and I need to pull us back to the Apple side, although, yeah, sort of along the same lines. I'm thinking of Argyle. I'm thinking of Killers of the Flower Moon. And I love Martin Scorsese. And, when they said it was going to cost maybe $200 million, it's like, well, how's that ever going to make that back that money? I'm thinking about Napoleon, which Ridley Scott is a great filmmaker. I don't know that his movies have pulled the way they used to, or maybe it's just because budgets. have gotten out of hand compared to people going to the movies, right after the pandemic. I don't know which thing it is, but like spending on TV kind of feels different than movies because movies are forever in ways TV isn't necessarily. Should, and I know this is a subjective question, but should Apple keep dropping $100 million, $200 million on movies that really, I mean, it only can be legacy because you're not going to make that back at the cinema.
Well, now you're getting into very choppy waters in terms of theatrical because leading up to the pandemic, there was already starting to be a shift in consumer movie watching habits where people were starting to get a lot pickier about which movies they were going to pay to see in a theater versus movies they were just going to watch on a streaming service or wait for it to drop on a streaming service. What happened with the pandemic when theaters were closed for a year was that accelerated that process. Everyone, whether they liked it or not, was watching everything movies at home. And whether they liked it or not, a lot of them did like it. So when the theaters reopened again for the last couple of years, you have certain movies that are breakout hits, starting with, let's say, Top Gun Maverick and Elvis. That summer, Everything Everywhere All at Once. And then last year, you had Barbenheimer, the marriage of Barbie and Oppenheimer. Both those movies did very, very well, especially Oppenheimer at the Oscars, Best Picture. And, this year you have Inside Out 2. Twisters opened with $80 million. But Apple's movie Fly Me to the Moon, which was released through Sony Pictures in theaters, but will probably be coming to Apple TV Plus very, very soon. That movie opened to less than $10 million in its opening weekend. And it's a shame. I love that film. I thought that was a wonderful movie. Very uplifting, rousing film. And Scarlett Johansson and Channing Tatum were great in the movie, really great chemistry, but people just didn't, they saw it, you know what, I think I'm just going to wait for theaters for that. Whereas a movie like Twisters and certainly Wolverine Deadpool, which opens tomorrow, those are movies that people go, I got to see that in theaters. But when it comes to the movies that you mentioned, like Napoleon and Argyle, Napoleon, maybe that would have done better if it wasn't an Apple TV thing because people would have had to have seen that in theaters. But overall, I think when it comes to the streaming services, they do much better with TV content than with film content. Like the Netflix had the most Emmy nominations this year. Netflix is a beast when it comes to television, especially, like The Crown and, like I said, Baby Reindeer, Ozark in the past, Stranger Things. Like, they're great with TV, but with film, and this applies to all the services, not just stream and not just Netflix, that's where they struggle because people, they haven't had the same like must-see rate of success with movies. Netflix, I'm talking about. Beverly Hills Cop 4, which was really, really good, a lot better than I expected it to be. That's actually turned out to be a big hit for Netflix. So was the movie Hitman, which was an acquisition from the Toronto Film Festival and the Venice Film Festival last fall. Great movie, but they didn't make it. They just bought it. But for the most part, a lot of movies that are just, whether they're in theaters for a little bit and then they go to streaming. The problem is that when it drops, it disappears. No one's talking about it anymore. And the reason for that is because you don't have like a bunch of episodes that drop all at once or episodes that drop every week. You have one movie and, it might be making news leading up to the day that it drops, but once it drops, that's it. You never hear from it again because it wasn't in theaters. You're not getting the extra press of how it's doing at the box office. You know what I mean? Like when Twisters opened and it made $80 million for the last week, that's what everyone's been talking. My God, the movie made way more than it was supposed to. You're getting all that extra press, and that's going to make people go see the movie if they haven't seen it yet. You don't get that when a movie drops on a streaming service.
Yeah, it is kind of, it's strange because I saw I was one of the sort of nightmare scenario things where I saw Killers of the Flower Moon, and the Taylor Swift movie was playing in the theater to my
Oh, the
right,
Eras tour. Yeah, yeah.
and the Taylor Swift movie was playing in the theater to my left. And so, honestly, I was halfway through the movie before I realized they're not doing something weird with the sound. I'm just hearing the concert from the two other places. And I
That's
thought for
funny. Yeah.
sure I'm going to watch this movie again at home because I got a decent sized TV. And as much as I loved the movie and as much as there were things about it, I haven't gone back to it. Probably again because there's just so much content like you're talking about. There was a question I meant to ask you before I was going to ask you about should they be spending as much money as they are. Uh, the longer we have this conversation, the more I wonder what it is Apple is doing in producing video. I think the first time anybody raised this question on a conversation that I was in was the day that it was announced that Apple was buying Beats by Dre. And for that, they were going to get the Beats streaming service, which had next to no listeners. It's weird to me that they bought that instead of building their own, but it seems to have worked out pretty well for them. And at that time, there was an article someplace that said there's also talking about Apple getting into video. And the two of the panelists that I was on with were like, that's stupid. Why would they? And my feeling was they've got more money than Croesus. Let them. It's fine because they can blow the money and still have it and see how it goes. The longer we go into it, though, when they start doing things like sending everybody home from the set of Foundation so they can figure out how to save money on it before they bring them back in, or when you start to get stories that says, well, we're gonna tighten our purse strings here. What are we trying to do? I mean, we don't have anything like ratings. We don't have anything like how much money it's making. We're just kind of having to watch it from the outside. You do
Right.
see things like Fly Me to the Moon, or you don't, as the case may be, but you see that, it only took in $10 million at the box office or something. That's a very visible, I don't want to say it's a failure because it may find new life when it goes to streaming the way Argyle
I hope it
seems to have as
does.
well. Well, that's, I had an email from a listener actually telling me it was a wonderful movie. First movie he's gone
It
out to
is.
since the pandemic. That's how, that got him and his wife out for the first time. Well, not out doing anything, but first time out of the movie. It's subjective. This question is subjective, but does it make sense for Apple to even be doing this? I mean, they can't get out at this point, but in retrospect, do you go, if you get a time machine after you kill Hitler, do you then go back to Cupertino and go, yeah, I know it seems like a good idea now, but trust me?
Well, you could ask that to any
Yes.
exec
Oh, we're
at
going to
any
do
of the
them all,
streaming
Scott. We're going to
services.
do them all. So I hope you've got
Yeah.
time.
Like I said, I mean, uh, like you can't, Star Trek Discovery. I'm going to use Star Trek as an example. That show was not. It had a rough start in terms of the reaction from the fans.
You're
Some
very
liked it, some
kind.
didn't.
Yeah.
What's that?
I said, you're
Yes.
very kind.
Yeah, some liked it, some didn't, and wasn't like, when you got to that third season of Picard, which was basically season 8 of Next Generation, like
Yeah.
that's a show that people watched.
Yeah.
But here's a show that is costing as much as a movie. Um, but you can't stop because then someone has to say, we made a mistake. We shouldn't have done this.
Right.
Who's going to be that person?
Yeah. Well, whoever takes over, but yeah, that's
But
going to
that's
be,
that's what I mean. Like you can't like say like I mean I think there's there's a somewhat subtle uh decision to scale back on production of Paramount Plus with the Star Trek shows. You could see it, you know.
Mhm.
Um and just overall with how much these shows cost, I'm still, blowing my mind how much you said the talent cost for a morning show. But the thing is, like Apple TV does have really good shows. I mean, Severance, Pachinko was a great show. Pachinko, that show looks like it cost a fortune, but
Yeah.
how many people actually watched it? Lessons in Chemistry was nominated for 10 Emmys. For All Mankind is a great show, totally my jam, up my alley. Morning show I love, and not just because I kind of relate to it. Presumed Innocent with Jake Gyllenhaal, that show's great. Loot was funny. I think that Apple TV, like if they have a show, I'm like more inclined to want to check it out because I think the quality of the work they're doing
Mhm.
is outstanding.
Yeah.
But like, I mean, I know where the money is coming from, but how long can you keep that going before you have to scale back? Which is why the Bloomberg article, there's got to be something to it. It's like that just come out of nowhere. Where there's smoke, there's fire.
Yeah, the foundation story in particular from earlier this year was the one that was like, okay, well, you can see that. I actually had a friend at a party, well, a guy I met at a party say, yeah, foundation's done, which broke my heart. And then I realized he didn't actually know what he was talking about. I mean, they may have scaled it back, and that's great, but I go to one Hollywood party a year, dude, and somebody was like, oh yeah, no, it's over. And I was crestfallen. And then I read that they're still producing. So
Yeah.
I don't think I'll be at the party that he was at again, but I don't know. All right, so I guess there are a couple of other places I want to go. There's been this thing that's frustrated me with other streaming services, like well, I'm thinking mostly about Paramount Plus and Peacock. Honestly, I like going to Netflix because I know what Netflix is going to give me. There's a whole bunch of stuff there, but I know what it's going to give me. For the most part, I know what Apple TV Plus is going to get me. If there has been an update to the Peacock app, I have no idea what's going to be front and center next time I go. Started off
Yeah.
being, I got on it for Poker Face. I got on it for like some of the legacy TV and that one new show. And now you turn it on, like, here are these 8 other channels that you didn't pay for, which, by the way, now we're charging you more than we started off doing. And here's the Olympics. Okay, that one's kind of cool, actually, because the Olympics have been hard to find online. Paramount Plus is a mess every time you turn it on. And I don't mean for us to concentrate on them so much. It feels to me like a lot of what these streaming services are trying to do is almost recreate the cable experience. First of all, is that your perception of it? And second, is that a good idea?
Well, I would say that, with more people cutting the cord, I haven't had cable TV since let's see, 2017.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I haven't had cable since 2017, but I did sign up for the Hulu TV bundle that gives me live TV access so I can watch like CNN, I can watch some of the local channels. I can watch myself on KTLA. So I think that they're still trying to figure that all out. Like, what do we do now? We've got all these services. People, they're raising the prices of the services, Disney Plus, Paramount Plus, Netflix. I mean, they're all raising their prices. And that means that just like they're cutting costs at the streamers on production, people at home are going to start cutting costs and be like, do I really need Paramount Plus? Do I really need Peacock? Do I really need Disney Plus? Well, yeah, I like the Marvel stuff, so yeah, I guess I need that. So uh and now they're all looking into, well, how do we bundle this? How do we bundle so people will bundle Paramount and Peacock and Hulu, but Netflix is like, we don't need to bundle. People are subscribing to us anyway. So I still think they're trying to figure it out. They don't know what the answer is. That's the problem. They don't know what the answer is.
I can tell you as a sometimes frustrated viewer, one of the biggest problems I have is when they say we're adding this content and we're going to charge you more for that content. It's like, well, I didn't ask you to add that content. I was signed up for the thing that I was signed up for, and thank you very much for adding Showtime, and I'm still not going to watch it. But now I'm going to
I'll
pay.
tell you what bothers me, Ken. I'll tell you what really, really
Do,
fuels my fire with that.
do it.
I signed up for the streaming services and cut cable because I'm like, great, I can watch a TV show or a film without advertising. Without advertising. I hate watching commercials. So I signed up for Hulu and I signed up to pay the rate that you pay for so you can watch the TV shows and movies ad free. And then out of nowhere, I'm starting to see ads on some of the films. And I'm like, wait a minute. I I bought this, I subscribed to this because I don't want to see ads. But guess what? Here's the good news for them. You can pay an extra fee to not get the ads. And I said, no, I signed on. When I signed on to not get the ads when I freaking signed on, and now you're giving me ads, and you're telling me, well, if you don't want ads, you got to pay more. I'm like, no, I want to pay what I was paying and not get the
Yeah.
ads.
It's
That bothers me.
horribly pernicious because, I mean, the second somebody says, we could put an ad there, all of a sudden that's money that's lost. I bought a Kindle, I don't even know how long ago, and it had ads on the front. And I thought, it's fine, whatever. Every time I open it up, it's advertising another book. And finally, one night I was like, how much is it to get rid of that? And I think it was like $12. And I did it. And now what I get when I open my Kindle is the cover of my book, which, I guess is how much they're expecting for the life of it or whatever. All right. So I got two more things. And I think I said that a minute ago, but I got two more things. Kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier. You talked about the writer's strike and how writers aren't even sure at this point whether the strike was worth it because now they're, finding it hard to book work. There's this other thing that's happening. God bless Sean Gunn. I love him, but he writes every line of everything he does. I'm trying to think of others off the top of my head, and it escapes me. Some of the Star Trek stuff, maybe. Nobody's fielding, from what I've heard, and you can, tell me or not, nobody is fielding as much of a writer's room as they used to. Now it is, we have hired this guy to write this show. On the one hand, you don't get any, weird mistakes, like Data's Day. I mean, you've got control, you've got the message, you've got exactly what you wanted, and you've got, 10 guys who used to be in a writer's room, guys and gals who used to be in a writer's room, who are, now saying, I can't find a gig. Talk to me about the way it's all produced today and fold in, if you will. And I use Data's Day a lot as an example. And if people don't know what we're talking about, Data's Day is this really weird episode of Star Trek that would never happen today because it was back when they were making 22 episodes a season, 26 episodes a season. Okay. They're making 26 episodes a season. Now you get a tight 10, and that tight 10 is really tight, but nobody was sitting there going, we shoot in 5 days. I mean, everything is so planned at this point. First of all, you don't get as much opportunity for outside talent or young talent or new talent. And then you also don't just get the craziness that TV used to present you with because they were like, well, it was this or dead air. Talk to me about, is there, let's just be old men. Do you want to see TV go back to the way it was? Do you want to see a combination of the two? Or do you feel like the tight 10 is actually the way it should be at this point?
Well, I think the genie is out of the bottle. You can't go back. It's never going to go back. As far as the 26 episodes versus 10 episodes, first of all, you had seasons started in the fall, in September. That's when shows would premiere. Then you'd have new shows kind of hit in January after some of the old shows were canceled. Then you might have a couple of shows that would hit in the summer, for people who were, still watching TV over the summer. But now it's like shows are dropping left and right every single day. There's no structure to it. People don't know when something is dropping. They know movies open on Friday. Movies open now. Well, now they open Thursday night, but still, right? movies open on Friday. Right. But with TV, there's no schedule. There's no way to know, unless you're reading about it online or on your laptops and stuff. But also 10 episodes, really, I mean, I love Strange New Worlds, but 10 episodes.
Yeah.
And when they were shooting Star Trek The Next Generation, they would shoot over 6 days. It would take 5 or 6 days to shoot an episode. And they were doing 26 of them a season, except season 2, which only had 22 because of a writer's strike.
Yeah.
But now you have Strange New Worlds. Okay, we're going to start filming season 3, and it'll take as long as it takes, and it'll drop when we're ready to drop it. By the way, it's like that with everything.
Yeah.
So...
I mean, granted, you had the strikes, which, were not nothing, but I believe it is almost 3 years between the end of the first season of Severance and the start of the second season. Right. That's a lot of time to expect me to wait and care. I mean, I might go back and watch the first season again because I remember loving it so much. Yeah. Or I might, just wait until 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 7 years from now, when all 3 seasons are finally out. And watch them all in a weekend. I got to say, I read Pachinko. I haven't watched Pachinko. I read Pachinko because it's about 2 years between seasons. And I thought, First of all, I don't know if they're going to finish it. Hey, Shintaram, how's it going? Or whatever that show was called.
Yeah,
I don't know if they're going to finish it, first of all. And second, I'm going to wait 3 years to, for a story that I could read, the book. And like, I'm a slow reader, and still it was like 2 or 3 weeks, I think. And it was an amazing book, by the way, if anybody's wondering.
sure. Right, right.
Yeah. All right. So we're just old men. I think that's really it. I want my Star Trek the way it used to be. And I don't know if Apple wants to keep spending billions of dollars on content. I guess I'm fine because I'm not a shareholder. I'm just a guy who watches them.
Yeah,
Now,
ditto.
one last question for you. I
Yep.
mean, is there, and I know it's been crazy over the past few years, is there any particular thing aside from cost cutting that you see on the streaming landscape?
Well, cost cutting. Anything that I see on the streaming landscape?
Like more
Uh,
consolidation, maybe, or is it going to be more of the I don't care if you don't want more channels, we're going to put more channels in the one channel you subscribe to?
Look, I think what we have seen lately is that the streamers are realizing how much it costs to be a streamer, and they are scaling back. And I think they're going to keep doing that. Uh, uh, but how long will that sort of contraction go on? How long will the belt be tight? Um, all it takes is another thing to happen, and then you've got, we're back in the wild, wild west of streaming. But I think people were, the streamers were writing checks that they couldn't cash when it came to having just as much content as they could to compete really with Netflix. And now they just went like, well, we're not making enough to cover this. We got to scale back. They're not done doing that. And I still think that, on one hand, I mean, the strikes were necessary for the writers and the actors, but the problem is that the strikes came after these workers were still struggling from the job losses during the pandemic, and whatever savings they had, they've eaten through, and now they can't find jobs. You got so many writers fighting for just a couple of positions on a show, and there's only so many shows because everybody's scaled back. It's really, really, really hard uh, to make a living in this business. It's almost like somebody overlooking the entertainment business in general is going like, how can we make this as difficult as possible for people to make a living doing what they're talented at and what they're good at and what they love? How can we just make that harder? I feel like, it's really been really, really friggin' hard the last few years. It's affected me in ways too, of course. My livelihood is movies, and movie theaters were closed for a year, so that wasn't fun. But like the I when it comes to like, well, let's see where the dust settles. The dust has not settled yet, so I really don't know where it's going. I'm not optimistic about it. But who knows? Maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised.
I know I said two more things 7 things ago, but I seriously have two more things, and you can make these as quick as you want to. If there
Okay.
is one thing, Ted Lasso not included, if there is one thing you think everybody should watch on Apple TV Plus, assuming that people watching this are Apple TV Plus subscribers, what would that one thing be?
I love For All Mankind. It just got renewed for a fifth season. It's an under the radar show. I mean, it's got a very devoted following. It's basically what would happen in this alternate universe if the Russians beat the Americans to the moon. So that's the jumping off point. That's the butterfly effect that sends the show off in a completely different direction. It's pure fiction, but the showrunner is Ronald D. Moore, who was the showrunner on the rebooted Battlestar Galactica. He did Outlander. He was definitely a veteran of Star Trek, working on Next Generation and Deep Space Nine and Star Trek Generations and First Contact. He's a brilliant guy, I think, and I think this is a show that is really imaginative and out there and very much about the human spirit, and that's a show that I love. I wish it was more people would talk about it, but the people I know, the nerds, like me, and like they love it. So that's what I would recommend for sure.
And the last thing is, you have said KTLA, but if people want to keep up with you other places, where are you on the socials? Is there a website you'd like to send people to? Where should they go for more Movie Mantz? There's your lead in.
There's the lead. Well, just go to Movie Mantz at or at Movie Mantz rather on Twitter and Instagram. That's where I just post all the work that I do, links to all my work from KTLA, all the Q&As that I cover, pictures and video. Everything's posted there. All my work is on my social media. So that's the best place to go to see me.
Scott Mantz, this was honestly, I could do this for another hour. So thank you very much for joining us today. I really appreciate your taking the time.
My pleasure, Ken. Thanks so much for having me, and all the best.